Most of us are taught at an early age that electronics and water don't tend to mix very well. And drones are usually no exception. Crash your Mavic into a lake, and it's unlikely that you'll ever see it take off again. A while back though, I remember scrolling through Instagram and coming across this FPV video that seemed like magic. This guy took this self-built FPV drone and placed it at the bottom of this pool like it was no big deal, and then did this. And at the time, this blew my mind, and I instantly sat down to do some digging. Now, not only did I find out how he did it, but it turns out the method is really easy. All he needed was a bottle of this. This liquid can be applied to the surface of any electronics, and when left out to dry, it solidifies, creating a thin protective barrier around those electronics that won't conduct electricity. Now, as long as you do it correctly, you have yourself a waterproof FPV drone. And I say it that way because when I tried it for the first time, I missed a spot. Fast forward to one morning, I was out filming hydrofoiling with my friend Max. It was during this one particular flight. I didn't realize how long I'd been out, and I suddenly noticed that my battery was really low. I tried to turn around and fly back as slowly as possible, conserving my battery. And I got so close. But just as I approached the shore, my battery died. I thought the drone was waterproofed and that it would be fine once I retrieved it, but it never flew again. Luckily, I had a water bottle strapped to the bottom, which at least allowed me to find the drone and salvage the GoPro, but the drone itself was garbage. Now, conformal coating isn't that hard, and all it takes is an extra moment just to make sure that you didn't miss any spots. But still, what if there was an easier way? What if someone made a drone that was just designed to be waterproof in the first place? Well, that's where this guy comes in. The Darwin FPV Hulk. An FPV drone that supposedly comes waterproof straight out of the box and is specifically designed to land and take off from the water. And today, I ran it through a series of tests to see if it actually works as advertised. All right, so there's 5 things that I'm going to test today. Number 1, I want to see how it flies in the air and whether these foam floaties have any effect on its performance. Then I want to see how it lands in the water, how it takes off from the water, and in one of their videos it showed that maybe it's possible to fly it in the water. We'll see. And lastly, I want to see how it can take a hit or a crash in the water. And I hope it works because honestly it's pretty much below freezing right now and I definitely don't want to go retrieve it. First, I just took it out for a slow cruise, mostly wanting to see how it felt in the air and if there were any vibrations that showed up in the GoPro footage. I noticed that for running on 6S batteries, it definitely wasn't the fastest drone, but also wasn't slow by any means, and some drag from the foam floats should be expected. As for the action camera footage, for the most part, it looked pretty good, but there were moments when I could notice a tiny bit of jello in the footage. I don't know if this was just an unavoidable side effect of the large floats or just the quality of the components, but either way, it honestly wasn't a lot and wasn't extremely noticeable. Unfortunately, the quality from the analog FPV camera, which is what I see in my goggles, was definitely lacking a bit. There were a few times when I flew past the trees along the shore, and although it looked cool on camera, I actually had no idea I was that close to those branches. Darwin FPV said they are working on an HD version of the drone, which would definitely help with visibility, but they still could have put a nicer analog camera on this version as well. Next comes the fun part though, actually testing it in the lake. But before I show you that footage, I should probably first show you what actually makes this drone unique. First of all the main electronics are encased in an aluminum shell, and this is the main feature that makes the drone waterproof. You can see that there are still some ports on the exterior, but with the connectors plugged in, they shouldn't cause a problem. The biggest risk would have been having electricity bridge between various pads on the circuit boards, and in this case, all of them are covered. Next, I thought that the foam floats would be on the bottom so that the drone could sit above the water, but they're actually on top with the motors underneath. We'll see shortly that this is actually really important. The battery also straps in underneath, which is less common. This is good because it'll keep the propellers elevated during takeoff and landing, but it'll also be the first thing to submerge underwater, which definitely made me nervous. But here's what happened. For my first attempt, I just tried a quick dunk in the lake. I disarmed the drone and let it fall. And after a second, I tried arming the motors again, and it worked. I was able to take off without a problem. If you were watching the analog footage though, you might have noticed something. As soon as I hit the water, I completely lost video, only for it to come back again right after. I learned this was because the antenna's signal can't really travel well underwater. As soon as the drone floats back up to the top, the video comes back. I actually tried another dunk in the water, but forgot to record my goggle footage this time. The results were exactly the same. So at this point, I started believing that this drone might actually be as waterproof as they say. But I wanted to know, if I was flying this drone for real, what kind of hits could it actually take? So I crashed it. And to my surprise, again, it immediately rearmed and took off. The GoPro was slightly knocked out of place, but besides that, everything was fine. So I tried again. And this was the coolest part. I decided to flip the drone over to see if it would lose all connection if it landed upside down. But when it hit the water, it just turned right side up. I thought this was a fluke, but in another crash, it did it again. And suddenly it clicked for me that the strange design of this drone is actually really smart. With the battery and most of the components being below the pool flow, most of its weight is down here. Meaning if the drone lands in the water right side up, its center of gravity will be below the water, making it really difficult for it to tip over. If you landed the drone upside down though, its center of gravity would be up here, causing it to be very unstable, and in most cases, it would tip back over into its preferred position. It's so simple, but smart. And I was so shocked how well this worked that I might have gotten a bit carried away. Now, one thing I have to mention is that when the drone was wet, I would start to feel random twitches in the air when the drone is flying. It did seem like the more water I shook off of it, the more they went away, but the water did have an impact on the way the drone flew. Also, if you decide to buy this drone yourself, there's a few other things you should keep in mind. Number one, when possible, avoid using it in salt water. If you do crash it in the ocean, at least just make sure to rinse off the drone with fresh water as soon as you can, because the salt will corrode the electronics. Number two, unplug your wet battery underwater when possible. I asked Darwin FPV if they recommend this, and they said it shouldn't matter, but either way, unplugging your drone's battery while it's still submerged in water will increase your chance of a successful recovery. I'll be honest, I didn't do that a single time during any of these tests, but that is the best way to do it. Number three, don't crash it on purpose. The fact that it can handle a big hit is impressive, but it's never guaranteed. And you will eventually break something, like I did here. Turns out, if you completely rip the foam out of place, the drone will no longer float like it's meant to. So what do I think? Well, there are a few pros and cons that I still haven't mentioned. Overall, I'm really impressed with the amount of abuse this guy can handle, because it's definitely not meant to be crashed on purpose, but it's nice to know that you might be able to just brush it off and fly away if it happens. The design, overall, is smart. Gotta give him credit for that. But I found it interesting how they went above and beyond in some areas, while others seem to be completely overlooked. For example, another detail I love about the design are these two 3D printed pieces here, which are actually there to stop your battery from sliding around. Because of these, when you crash in the water, as long as your battery fits between these 2 points, the chances of it getting pulled out during an impact is very unlikely, increasing your chance of flying away during a crash. On the other hand, because of its design, the camera's tilt is limited to about 25 degrees. Maybe there was a reason for this, I don't know, but I sometimes like to fly at 35 or 45, and the extra speed would have been nice as well. What bothered me more though is that the GoPro is also limited to a similar angle before it hits the frame. This worried me because if it takes a big hit, there's definitely a chance that the back screen would crack from compressing against the frame. My solution was to put a thin piece of foam between them, but it's definitely not ideal. When it came to the unboxing, I had a similar mix of emotions. I was impressed that the drone came with a second set of floats. They also threw in a free prop tool that I actually really like, and it also comes with a full mini screwdriver set, which is so extra. It's very much appreciated, but I also feel like that money could have been spent on a better analog camera. There's also this extra 3D printed part that is meant to be strapped to your battery to protect it during a landing, and also to elevate your drone further from the ground, which is another nice touch. However, with all these add-ons, I was surprised to see that you only get one set of props. The propellers are the easiest thing to break on your drone, and I would say most pre-built drones these days come with at least an extra set. Also, the first thing that caught my attention when I opened the box were how carelessly these foam floats were cut. You can see here how rough this cut is, and that chunk missing, that isn't from an impact, it just came like that. Of course, this isn't a big deal, but when it comes to packaging, this was my first impression of what's to come, and it makes the product look really cheap. Also, on a similar note, aesthetics are really important to me, and when it comes to the Hulk, the graphics that came on the floats, as well as the frame design in general, remind me of a product from the early 2000s. If I was purchasing this myself and had no idea how cool this quad actually is, the design and packaging would have turned me away for sure. All that aside though, I gotta give some credit to Darwin FPV. Lately, it seems like most FPV companies are just copying one another, producing more of the same products that we've already seen before, while Darwin FPV seems to be trying to find their place by actually innovating and finding gaps in the market where they can make a difference. And honestly, I'm here for it. And if you guys are interested in picking one up, I'll have links to it down below. As always, I appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.